This is Society in Transition, and I will be presenting the causes and effects of continuing policy debates about the role of the federal government over time. So, a cause of the policy debates about the role of the federal government was new parties. So, important people would be Andrew Jackson, who led the Democrats, and he said Henry Clay was the basest, meanest scoundrel that ever disgraced the image of his God, and Henry Clay, who led the Whigs, and said Andrew Jackson was ignorant, passionate, hypocritical, corrupt, and easily swayed by the basest men. The Democrats and Whigs rose during the 1820s and 30s. They disagreed about the powers and role of the federal government and argued about issues such as the national bank, tariffs, and federally funded internal improvements. Speaking of Henry Clay again, he implemented the American system, which was another cause of the policy debates about the role of the federal government. So, its purpose was to tie together the American economy. It generated debates over whether such policies would benefit agriculture or industry, potentially favoring different sections of the country. The federal government did not pay for internal improvements, so states then had to. The Northeast and Midwest invested in roads and canals, and the South did not invest in roads or canals. The political cartoon to the right kind of shows the different sections' opinions on this. There were high tariffs to raise the prices on importing goods and a new federal income tax to extract revenue from them at every opportunity. To expand on the American system, James Madison originally pushed for the system, and then Congress passed a bill to improve roads and canals, and Madison vetoed it. He came to oppose permitting the federal government to exercise powers not explicitly mentioned in the An effective policy debate about the role of the federal government was the Missouri Compromise. Some historical context would be that there was an increasing tension over slavery. Henry Clay promoted this compromise. It was basically a congressional attempt at political compromise, but only temporarily stemmed the growing tensions between the opponents and defenders of slavery. It said that the first territory to join from the Louisiana Purchase sets precedent of free and slave states entering in pairs. An example was that Missouri was a slave state and Maine was a free state, and there would be no slavery above the 3630 line. Tariffs were a large reason of why there were policy debates over the role of the federal government. They were partly created to give a revenue to the federal government. They profited the North. The South disliked tariffs and said they'll leave the Union if they were taxed. Democrats believed tariff revenue could be reduced by reducing the tariff rate, while Republicans believed that by increasing the tariffs, imports would decrease and total tariff revenue would be reduced. There was the Great Tariff Debate of 1888, where Democrats and Republicans debated over that issue. Another cause of policy debates over the role of the federal government were regional political and economic differences. People were asking the question, should the federal government make most decisions or should state governments? These regional interests affected politicians' stances on different issues, and the Northerners and Westerners favored tariffs, banking, and internal improvements, while Southerners opposed them because those measures were putting them at a disadvantage, and they believed it gave too much power to the federal government. Some more specific regional political and economic differences would be that the Northeast had developing textile industries, supported tariffs because they protected businesses. The Midwest, commercial farming was developing. They were lukewarm on tariffs because they increased costs. They opposed banks because they saw them as too powerful, causing them harm. An example of that would be the Panic of 1819. And the Southeast and Southwest had developing plantation farming. They opposed tariffs because they increased costs and believed internal improvements were too expensive and shouldn't be a federal power. The 1790s political debates and revolution of 1800. So, important people here would be Jefferson and Madison. They reduced taxes and tariffs, and they were also Republicans that wanted that power to remain with the states. But there was a disagreement in the 1790s where Hamilton, a Federalist, wanted the federal government to hold most of the political and economic power. Effects of this were to shrink the government. It expanded federal power through the Embargo Act and Louisiana Purchase, and Federalists were almost defeated. Power of Supreme Court. An important person here would be John Marshall, who was appointed as the Chief Justice. There was Marbury versus Madison, which gave judicial review, which was review by the U.S. Supreme Court of constitutional validity of a legislative act. There was McCulloch versus Maryland, which supported Supreme Court power over state power. Gibbons versus Ogden, which said states can't make laws superior to federal laws, and the federal government controlled trade.